Good afternoon, Cary Rotary Club.
Good afternoon.
It's great to see everybody here. Happy International Women's Day. Before we start, I want to take a moment to thank all of the extraordinary women that make contributions to our club and our community. So that there are not enough of you in our club, but those that are here make a huge impact. So thank you. Can I ask Tim Mannix to lead us in the prayer and the pledge, please?
Please bow your head. Dear Lord, we got a lot of problems that are going on in this world. We got our problems here in America with all our politics and stuff. We got the problem in Europe. Say a prayer for the people in Ukraine. But despite all the problems that we got, we're also the most blessed people in the world. And we're especially blessed as Rotarians to be able to share with people and give back. Because we can't do that by ourselves, but all we can do at one point is good enough. We thank you for our families, we thank you for our friends, and we thank you for the Cary Rotary Club. For this and all the other things we should be thankful for, we say, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If I could ask you all to please remain standing.
for what?
This is another reason. This is a special day. After consulting with our experts and the board, I'd like to please ask Tim Mannix to lead us in the singing of God Bless America.
God bless America, land that I love, stand beside her and guide through the night with light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans wide with flow. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, my home sweet home.
Oh. That feels good. Thank you, Tim. Be nice to return to that tradition. I've got information that Ron Stanton is going to help us introduce our guests and visiting Rotarians. That was a table dropper, a plate dropper for me too, Bill. Because I also have that Mr. Mann was signed up to do that. So we have the honor of having a potential tandem team introduce our guests. I'll let you guys hash it out.
President Ball, we have a few guests. John Hacker here. John, introduce your guest, please.
I should say I represent a whole lot of people from Glen Eyre, but Executive Director of Glen Eyre is Ben Stevens, our guest today.
Welcome, Ben.
Bob Griffin, our president, has two guests.
Oh, my goodness. Well, on behalf of Harold Bennett, let me introduce Aiden Jones. Aiden is joining us for, I guess, the third time now. So thank you, Aiden.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you,
Aiden.
everyone.
And also prospective member Brant Rubin is joining us today. So welcome, Brant.
President Bob.
Thank you, Ron. Great job, Charlie. Good leadership counts,
He was a
right?
great assistant. Great assistant.
Yes. Well, I'm thrilled to have you, Ben, Aiden, and Brant, and we look forward to having you with us as members going forward. A couple of brief announcements. Can I call on Ernie Faulkner?
Yeah, I wanted to just make an announcement for the Salvation Army. I know that everybody here, just about everybody here rung the bell last December. I know a lot of you put some dollar bills in the kettles and several put some checks in the kettle. And a lot of you put some extra checks in the mail to the Army. And our campaign last year, we were able to raise $1,732,000. And as a side note, sir, a decent amount did come from Cary, not all, but a decent amount. And it'll probably be a number I will remember for a long time, because most of y'all probably know that 1732 was George Washington's birthday. And it's also the square root of 3. So thanks for all your help.
Great job.
Thank you, Ernie, and thank you to everybody that took the time, you and your families, to ring the bell. Mr. Jim Lovejoy.
Thank you, President Bob.
In January, we restarted Memory Cafe after a big pause, and we had 2 guests. In February, we had 6 guests. Today, this afternoon, we have 29 guests.
Fantastic.
It's rolling.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jim. That's great news. I know that you and Ron and a number of other members are very active in Memory Cafe. And of course, we provide financial support for that as well. So great to have that meaningful event resume. Seems like a day for things to get a little bit closer to the way they used to be. That's great. Tim made mention earlier in the invocation, made reference to the way things are in the world. And so I just wanted to call your attention to a note that past District Governor Marie Howard sent our district foundation chair, indicating, that our district has had a disaster relief fund for some time. And generally speaking, the proceeds of that disaster relief fund are generally distributed. But I did want to call your attention to the fact that the group has made a decision through the end of April of 2022. All gifts to that district disaster relief fund will be allocated and targeted for relief in the Ukraine, in and around the Ukraine, people impacted by that. It feels it's not enough to call it a conflict, right? that terrible thing that's happening over there. And so our group is always very generous. To the extent you're moved to make a contribution, that fund is there to help facilitate that. On a lighter note, this Saturday coming up is Cary's Arbor Day celebration. So if you have some time between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. Saturday afternoon, head over to Bond Park. There's going to be an event supporting Arbor Day with different kind of planting and soil teaching demonstrations, as well as activities for the whole family. A number of us are involved in some of the events related to that. And so I just wanted to extend that invitation for the town. And who can forget that on Thursday, March 31st, your very own Cary Rotary Club is going to be attending the Carolina Hurricanes hockey game against the Montreal Canadiens. So good seats are still available. If you haven't already, let me know that you're interested in attending. Please do so. They're about discounted by tickets are about $100 off their face price, and we've got some parking passes. So it's a good opportunity to come together as a group and cheer on the Eastern Conference leading Carolina Hurricanes.
Wow.
Yes, sir.
For all of those of you who have not committed to going, I will be harassing you personally.
Carrot, stick. And I guess I better get my name on that list too. I'm planning to go. I don't want to be harassed personally. All right, any miracle moments for today that we'd like to recognize? Darren.
Not a miracle moment as much as it is just something I saw on Facebook that I'm really intrigued by, and I'm actually doing it right now. Someone just booked an Airbnb in Kiev, sent a message to the homeowner. I have no intention of being there, but wanted to send this to help you and your family. So I'm currently in the process of booking an Airbnb that I have no intention of staying at. And I'm actually typing a message to the owners of the home. So if you find it in your heart, they're actually relatively inexpensive. I'll say this, there's not a single night in a hotel there that's as cheap as you could get anywhere in Cary. They're all relatively inexpensive. So get on there, help the family out, give them $50 over there, it goes a long way. So that's just what I'm doing today.
Great idea to be personally involved. People of action. Thank you, Darren. Anyone else, anyone online? All right, well, in that case, it gives me great pleasure to ask Dr. Bruce Howell to come forward and introduce our special guest today.
Thank you, President Long. We're indeed honored to have today returning David McLennan, who is professor over at Meredith College. And David earned his PhD degree from the University of Texas in Austin. He has taught at Texas Christian University, North Carolina State, William Pierce University. He's taught such courses as American government, campaign and elections, political leadership, women in politics, and the list goes on and on. He's a former political consultant, done extensive research. At his current position, he does the statewide poll, which surveys North Carolina politics. He has authored The Status of Women in North Carolina Politics. You don't want to hear about me up here for a long time. He is also a political analyst and appears in news stories for local, state, and national media. He's been on BBC, NPR, PRI, and WRAL. You'll also catch him in the News and Observer, The Hill, U.S. News and World Report, and any numerous places. But we are honored to have David here, and I don't want to take any more of his time.
Well, thank you all for having me here today. Thank you, Bruce, for inviting me. This is my return visit. We were trying to get together during earlier COVID times, but I told Bruce that I really don't prefer to do presentations over Zoom. So the fact that you're back in person and the fact that I'm here is a good thing. Well, there's a lot you can talk about with politics today. I mean, clearly I've listened to the invocation and to some of the activities your club is doing, and I'm truly in awe of your organization. You're showing the spirit that Americans do have for helping people not only in this country, but around the world. So it is really good to be among you today, but I want to talk a little bit about what all this stuff that's going on means for this year in politics. There's a lot we could talk about. I'm going to keep my remarks relatively brief, so I may be going through some slides pretty quickly. I'd like to finish up and give you a few minutes to ask questions if you would like. Well, my political philosophy hero is Yogi Berra, and nothing is more apropos than Yogi right now in March of 2022. I'm not here to make predictions about who's going to win the midterm elections. That'd be ridiculous at this point in time. There's so many uncertainties. But I do think Yogi does have something to say about where we are, not only in our nation's history, but in world history as well, and how difficult it is to look past even tomorrow. We are living in limbo, not just because of Ukraine, but because of so many other things. And that's going to be my thesis today, is that our political world is very uncertain. There could be many things impacting what could happen in November, what could happen in 2024. Ukraine being one significant event. We still are suffering from COVID. We may see another variant come through. We have all kinds of other things. We live in a very fractured world. And so I think as our attention is on Ukraine at this moment, we can't forget that there are other places in the world that are suffering in many different ways. Wars in Yemen, what's happening in Afghanistan is a crisis. There are many other places. So as we talk about the world as being fractured, all of these things are going to impact politics in the United States in 2022. I think we have some existential risks that are going to affect politics and some political risk. The existential risk, dealing with extremism. I was talking to a group of elected officials this morning, and I said, how do you handle the hyper-partisanship that is really tearing at the fabric of this country? And they say it's hard. Sometimes you have to look just one person down the line and say, how can I talk to you? Well, this hyper-partisanship we see playing out in discussions about what President Biden's doing related to Ukraine, what President Biden's doing related to inflation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll talk about that in a few minutes more. COVID, again, I don't know. I'm not a public health official. I don't know where COVID is going. I'm pleased to be here without a mask at this moment in time. I may be wearing a mask in 2 weeks. World War III. I'm not trying to be an extremist, but we don't know what's going to happen in Europe. I hope it ends soon for the people of Ukraine's sake, but we don't know what's in the mind of Vladimir Putin. And I think one of the things that's often underlooked in terms of politics is the increasing impact of natural events, extreme weather events. Look at what's happened in the West last year. At our table, we were talking about water. We look out the windows behind us and we see plenty of water. But around the country, as well as around the globe, we could be seeing severe policy fights and political fights over something that we take for granted. But extreme weather events are contributing to that. Political risk. There's so many political risks that I want to talk about just for a few minutes today. Joe Biden has a whole host of risks. He's in his second year in the presidency. His numbers, his approval numbers are down. People talk about him being weak on the economy, weak on the border, weak on crime. We're waiting to see how Ukraine works out. Democrats are very worried. If you know Democrats or you're a Democrat yourself, this is a bad time to be looking at a midterm election, historically. However, the Republican Party doesn't have a rosy future either. They have their own problems. In the Senate, I'll talk about what could happen in the Senate, in the House. The voters, I pity you poor voters in North Carolina in the coming 6 months. We're literally going to see a zillion ads. Not a million, not a billion, or a zillion. Because we have some of the most contentious, high-profile races in the country in our state. Wasn't it nice when many years ago we lived in North Carolina and we didn't have the most competitive races in the country that could affect the outcome of the Congress? It was nice. Well, we're not there. If you're a moderate politically, you see sometimes the world changing in front of you. We used to have a Congress full of moderates, and now at the state level, at the federal level, there are very few moderates left and very few moderate districts left for moderate candidates to run. And finally, if you're an incumbent, incumbency used to be really almost a guaranteed victory for incumbent members of Congress or the legislature. But now the electorate's very restless. And so if I was an incumbent running in a competitive race in this country, I'd be worried. So those are some of the existential and political risks that I think are going to shape 2022. Extremism. We see the world in completely different ways. Some of us see COVID as nothing more than just simply the flu. Others of us see COVID as being some kind of world-changing event, almost posing an existential risk for the human race. But if you're like me, you're somewhere in the middle. And most of us are probably in the middle looking at COVID or the economy. Are we facing the 1970s all over again economically with stagflation, no growth, lots of inflation? Remember those days? Or are we facing a boom again once we get through some of the other events? The economy is just going to take off and we're going to have something like that. I don't know, but I think most of us feel pulled in those two different directions. On US-China relations, are we going to have good relationships with China? Or are we going to have something terrible going on with China? Politics, are we going to have any stability in politics? Or is there going to be change happening all the time? Brands, are we going to keep having culture war fights within the commercial product companies? Or are we going to have satisfied companies that keep growing and serving their customers? The point is that this extremism that we talk about is not simply Republicans and Democrats. It's we are divided in so many different ways in our culture today. And it affects us in so many different ways, and it has an impact on politics. Can we find that middle ground again, both politically, economically, and in world events? So I think extremism poses a big risk. Are we going to be further apart come election day 2022, or are we going to find some common ground? COVID, we've seen peaks and valleys. You're familiar with these charts. Right now, things look pretty good. COVID, the Omicron variant seems to be the bottom falling. Well, but I don't know what's on the horizon. We have lots of people vaccinated and some people not. We have government relaxing their COVID regulations right now. Even Wake County schools this week went mask optional. The governor came out and said after March 7th, everyone should be mask optional. So we seem to have some relaxed, almost back to normal policies related to COVID. But we're not prepared for the next pandemic or endemic. Public health officials will tell you that this is the time to invest, not when we're in the midst of a pandemic, but as we're thinking about the next pandemic, and we're not doing the public health investments. So we don't know what's going to happen 6 months from now. And then look at what's happening around the world. Your organization has got that outward focus. Well, Ukraine is definitely a focus right now. And we're seeing A refugee crisis happened because of Ukraine. Estimates of 5 million Ukrainians will be displaced from Ukraine by next month. But that's not the only place in the world where we're seeing an outflow of people from their homes. 2021, we had 57 million people displaced from their own home countries, the highest number ever. So there are many places around the world where we have refugees. That impacts US policy and US politics. We have the risk of war, not just the war that's going on in Ukraine, the risk of war in Taiwan is there. We have the Middle East. So all of these create a very existential risk, not only for us as human beings, but for the American political system. And we've still got strains of economic nationalism around the world. This idea that it's only for us, this idea that we are an interconnected economy is really not what many world leaders believe in, including some in this country. So economic nationalism is going to still be here in November. And we'll hear one party or the other campaigning on this idea of America first or America only. So that's an important existential risk in terms of things that could affect the US political system. And again, as I said before, we don't know what the weather's going to be like tomorrow, but certainly over the summer. Are we going to have a dry summer where we have huge wildfires? Are we going to have lots of tornadoes? Are we going to have hurricanes this year? We don't know what's going to happen in terms of extreme weather events. We are seeing evidence that they're increasing. These are affecting the political system. Just look at what the Western governors had to deal with, or look at what Eastern and Southern governors deal with during a peak hurricane season. These all are going to affect politics between now and Election Day 2022 and beyond. Now I want to just talk for a few minutes about political risk. Joe Biden is in a very risky situation. Not only because of world events, and because of other things, but because of the perceptions of Joe Biden, not just among Republicans, but among a large number of Americans. He's perceived as soft on immigration. Even though the focus on immigration is lessened over the last couple of weeks, that's going to be a campaign issue. The issue of crime, even though if you watch the State of the Union address, Joe Biden said, fund the police, not defund the police. The perception is crime is an increasing problem in Cary, in Raleigh, around the United States. And the president gets the blame. Soft on inflation. We don't know what the price of gas is going to be on Election Day. Right now, I filled up this morning on the way over here and I paid $4 a gallon. In Los Angeles, it's over $6 a gallon. We don't know what it's going to be like, again, because of the Biden administration's decision to stop importing Russian oil, or just simply about what will happen with world events. But what can Joe Biden do? Well, an economist would tell you relatively little. On the other hand, what voters say is he better do something. Well, that's a tough position to be in. And then foreign policy. Well, the jury's out about Joe Biden's handling of foreign policy. He seems to be getting some credit for the Ukrainian situation. China poses some issues. North Korea keeps shooting off ballistic missiles. The Iran nuclear deal is hanging in the balance. So Joe Biden has a lot of risk in foreign policy. All of these are going to be, again, if you were Joe Biden right now, you'd be facing a very uncomfortable political environment in the 2022 midterm elections. Well, Democrats fear this could be a wipeout election. History would tell us that Democrats, because Joe Biden's in his first term in office, face a very uncertain midterm future. We have a lot of people retiring from the House on the Democratic side. We have Joe Biden's net approval, 14 points underwater. We have Republicans more enthusiastic at this point in time in terms of voting in the midterm elections. And we've got 2/3 of Americans feeling like the country's going in the wrong direction. Those factors usually lead to a really bad year for the party in power. So that's what Democrats are sitting there worried that, if this turns out to be a typical midterm election year or a president in his first term, we could lose control of one or both chambers of Congress. However, the GOP is not perhaps making some good choices that would make their road to controlling the US Senate more likely. They have in the past chosen candidates that are unelectable. You might remember some of their candidates, Todd Aiken, who made an unfortunate comment, a horrible comment about rape and lost in Indiana. Christine O'Donnell, whose first political ad had to say, "I am not a witch." That's usually not a good way to start a political campaign. She was accused of witchcraft, and so on and so forth. So right now, as we look around the country, we're seeing Republicans having some difficulty in choosing a candidate that can win a race. In in Ohio, we have people fighting out to get to the bottom between J.D. Vance and some of his competitors. We have some people on the Republican side who could be elected, like Arizona Governor Ducey. If you saw that recently, he said, "No, I'm not going to run against Mark Kelly." And he would have been a good candidate to take back a seat for the Republicans in Arizona, but he chose not to run. So my point is, there's a risk to Republicans, even in a good year for Republicans, that in the Senate side, they could lose some seats because of their selection of candidates. In the House side, it's not unprecedented that the party who should win doesn't win. It's an off-year election. So there are years in the past, 98, 2002, and 2018, where conventional wisdom kind of gets turned on its head. So my point is, there's a risk to Republicans trying to take back the House. It doesn't always favor the party out of power. So we've seen some evidence from the past that Democrats could actually do okay. I'm not saying one way or the other. Remember, I'm not making predictions. I'm just saying what could happen. And then, as I mentioned before, this is going to be an expensive, this is going to be the most expensive midterm election year in history. We know the themes, what the Republicans are going to run on. The Republicans are going to run on Biden's mismanagement of all kinds of things. Economy, domestic failures, COVID, and foreign failures. So we're getting ready to hear ads that we can predict right now. And also this idea of too much wokeness. The idea that there is too much wokeness. That's going to be a GOP theme. They're going to talk about schools. They're going to talk about books. They're going to talk about cultural issues. So that's what we're going to see in the $1 zillion worth of ads that the Republicans are running. On the other hand, you can predict what the Democrats are going to run in their ads. Republicans are too dangerous. You might take away the right to vote, the right to abortion. They're anti-civil rights. They're anti-vax, anti-gun control, anti-climate. You're going to hear the name Trump over and over and over again from Democratic ads, even though Mr. Trump is not on the ballot. Perhaps not until 2024. And you're going to hear some positive themes about Democrats that the economy is doing pretty well and we did pretty well with COVID. And look, we actually did some things while we had control. We passed an infrastructure. So my point is that there's going to be a lot of stuff that we already know is going to be part of the political culture, but we're going to hear it over and over and over again. Risk number 10, and we see this with the North Carolina electoral districts, which the Supreme Court said late yesterday were okay to go forward with. There are very few moderate districts left in North Carolina. They're drawn even under the court orders. Republican districts are generally pretty safe. Democratic districts are pretty safe. We have some competitive districts, but not that many. There are 40 seats in the North Carolina House that are already determined before a vote is cast. There are 20 seats in the North Carolina Senate that are already determined because even though no vote is cast, they're drawn in such a way where they're not competitive. Therefore, the other party doesn't put up a competitor. So we're seeing swing districts disappearing all over the country. And again, my view of political races is competition is good, because if you don't like the incumbent, vote him out. Well, it's hard to do that. We don't have competitive districts. And then the last risk, the last political risk is Americans are restless. Whatever party is in power doesn't stay in power long. This illustrates the increasing amount of change either in one chamber of Congress, both chambers of Congress, or the White House since the 1950s. Look at that bottom line there. We've had turnover in terms of control of one of those chambers or the presidency, and sometimes more than one of those, almost every election cycle, except from 2004 and 2012. That indicates that we're not a Republican country, we're not a Democratic country, we are a country of dissatisfied consumers. And they ain't getting it right. All right, so that's a real risk. So even though we have lots of incumbents running for re-election, again, in some districts, in some states, that's not a good thing. So what am I looking at from now until election day? I'm a pollster, so I'll be doing polling from now until election day, but I'm looking at not just polling results, but larger trends. I'm looking at Biden's approval. Now, on the left, you see the Real Clear Politics average of all the polls. It's not one poll, it's all the polls, we aggregate them. So you see he's underwater, at least as of yesterday, by about 10 points. He's making a slight rebound after the State of the Union and after his response to Ukraine, but if we remember anything about history, remember George H.W. Bush, after we expelled Iraq from Kuwait. Remember, he had 90% approval, public approval. You also remember who lost the presidential election in 1992? The same person. So my point is, Joe Biden's approval is going to be impacted by things that go on in Ukraine, but it's not going to necessarily be permanent. So Joe Biden's got to do more than stand up to Vladimir Putin to bring his approval ratings back into some sense of balance. But kind of compare him to Donald Trump and Barack Obama at roughly this point in his presidency, he's really not that far off. Now, again, Donald Trump lost a lot of House seats in his first midterm after his election. And you remember Barack Obama got wiped out. His party got wiped out in 2010. So it's not good for a president to be this far underwater. So I'm going to be watching Joe Biden's approval. There we go. Why is this important? Well, this is a busy chart, but let me just kind of summarize it on the left. When presidents have less than a 50% approval rating, and this is modern history from Truman all the way down to through Trump. When presidents have less than a 50% approval rating, they lose a whole lot more seats. So less than a 50% approval, the average number of House seats lost is 40. Even if you have 50% job approval, the average is losing 14 seats. So history tells us that Joe Biden can help the Democrats' case by bringing his approval ratings up, but even that may not be enough. So again, I'm watching Joe Biden's approval in part to determine how many House seats will Democrats lose. I'm also watching 3 C's. The public opinion on 3 different issues. Coronavirus, first C. You know, right now, the country's about 50-50. How has Joe Biden's administration handled coronavirus? It's about 50-50. That can change. I'm looking at costs. How are Americans feeling about the Biden administration's handling of economic things, including inflation? Right now, Americans feel like maybe another party could do a better job handling some of the economic problems facing the country. And I'm looking at crime. So my third C is, what do Americans think about how the Biden administration is handling crime? Right now, the numbers aren't good. So right now, the 3 main issues I'm following, coronavirus, crime, and cost, are not looking good for Democrats. Now again, Ukraine is going to be the big wild card here. Unfortunately, it doesn't start with a C, so I couldn't put it on my chart as being 4C, but we just don't know. I mean, there could be peace breaking out in Ukraine, and hopefully that's the case, and that becomes less of an issue. It could expand into other countries, involve more American support. That makes it a huge issue. Again, 2002 is the exception for, that was George W. Bush's first midterm election. It was after 9/11. Republicans won seats. So a wartime president, kind of the bets are off. There's one more C that I follow. Culture. As much as I find the whole culture debate in this country to be superficial and kind of nauseating, it is driving politics now, whether it's about the book banning, critical race theory, mask in school, all of these things that we're having debates about, which I think are generally, most people involved in are ill-informed about them. They're driving politics. And I'm going to give you some evidence of that in just a second. Well, my evidence for that is, I'll tell you in just a second. I'm going to make some predictions, not about who's going to win the White House, because there's no election in 24, not going to win the US House or the US Senate or anything like that. But I'm going to make just a few predictions way too early. You should never ask a political forecaster to make a prediction in March about something that happens in November. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's going to really happen. In North Carolina, Democrats have a map problem. Not a math problem, a map problem. Now, they made some wins at the court level to try to get their political maps more favorable to them. But the real problem with North Carolina Democrats is not who draws the maps or even where the map lines go. It's just where Democrats live. All right, so Democrats are increasingly concentrated in urban areas. Raleigh, Charlotte, Greensboro, you know that. Well, we have 100 counties in North Carolina. And even though Wake, Mecklenburg, Guilford, and others are growing, we still have a lot of counties in North Carolina that are trending against Democrats, including what are called countrypolitan counties. The biggest problem the Democrats face is not in Wake County, because Wake County is trending Democrat. The problem is Johnston County. The problem is not Mecklenburg County, because that's trending Democrat. The problem is Union County. Those counties right outside the urban counties. These are the counties where Democrats are struggling in North Carolina, called countrypolitan. They're not rural counties, they're not urban counties, they're right on the edge. So redistricting may affect Democrats' chances a little bit, but it doesn't deal with that, what I think are the fundamental issues in terms of that Democrats face, which is not being able to appeal to countrypolitan or rural Democrats. Supreme Court race. I see I'm getting short on time, so I'll make this super fast. Supreme Court race is going to be probably a race you might not be familiar with, but it's going to be super expensive and super important. Republicans have targeted this race. Prediction number 3 is the US Senate race. You probably got things in your mailbox already. The Republican candidates, Rory, Budd, are attacking each other already. That's going to continue throughout the primary. General elections are going to be just as divisive. And the final prediction I'm going to make is the moderates are fighting back. As we saw in San Francisco with the school board races, 3 of the most liberal members of the San Francisco school board were recalled. And we see other elections like in Virginia and in New York City where progressivism is kind of, well, isn't being favored by voters. So anyway, my last prediction is let's not give up on moderation, political moderation just yet. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And if I have 30 seconds for a question, if Bill's telling me I don't.
One question.
Yes.
From what I read, about a third of the registered voters in North Carolina are unaffiliated. How do they typically do?
So that's a great question. So we've seen, when you register to vote, you can register Democrat, Republican, unaffiliated, or a few other third parties. We've seen the number of unaffiliated voters increase to the point at which they've passed the number of registered Republicans, and they will soon pass the number of registered Democrats. So they're the biggest single group of registered voters in the state, but they don't all vote as true independent voters. And so the question is pretty complex. Young voters who register increasingly as unaffiliated voters tend to favor Democrats. Older rural voters that register unaffiliated tend to favor Republicans. People in Wilmington who are unaffiliated tend to vote Republican. People in Wake County that tend to register unaffiliated vote Democrat. About 8 to 9%, according to one of my colleagues, Michael Bitzer at Catawba, are true independent voters, which means they vote either way.
Dr. McLennan, thank you very much. The Rotary has a rule.
I understand it. I don't violate rules.
We want to please accept these gift cards from us. Not gift cards, but note cards. From Jerry Miller, our resident artist and founding member of this club. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, David. May you live in interesting times. And it's fascinating to me that political analysts and scientists like yourself can identify the 2 or 3 metrics that are really going to be predictive going forward. So thank you for sharing some of that with us. All right. Seated next to you, we have a gentleman that we want to recognize today because Bruce Howell on Saturday of this week will be celebrating a milestone, a special day in his life. So I want to wish you, Bruce, a very happy and healthy birthday. Happy birthday, Bruce. '29.
29, wow.
Which makes his 45 years of Rotary membership quite extraordinary. Our program next week, David Coulter has made arrangements for Tom Price, who's an instructor with OLLI, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, if you're familiar with it, who's going to come and speak to us about self-driving cars. So we'll get a little futuristic here at the Rotary Club. Also important next week is that we will have our vote on the incoming slate of officers for the 22-23 year. So please be prepared for that.
I'm unaffiliated, if anything.
Yeah,
Open for business.
There you go. After we vote, we'll enjoy a meal of cheeseburger with lettuce, onions, pickle, and tomato with some French fries on the side. In 2 weeks, Bill Fletcher's arranged to have Kathy Moore, the superintendent of schools for Wake County, to come and give us an update. So we'll definitely look forward to that. We continue our series of fantastic programs. So thank you to the program committee for all your work on that. I want to thank Aiden, Brant, Ben. We're so glad to have you with us today. Hope you can see what it's like to be a member in the community and can try our club on to size, and it fits like a custom-made suit. We look forward to seeing you again. With that, can I ask Jim Lovejoy? Jim, would you be willing to lead us out in the four-way test?
President Bob, I would. The four-way test of the things we think, say, and do.
Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
We are adjourned. Great week.